Was there anyone born after 1992 and before 2005 who liked anime and didn't watch Yu-Gi-Oh! When they were growing up? It was kind of the show a child couldn't help but get caught up in, with all the monsters, strategy, and friendship displayed throughout. If you're watching this video, you most likely know what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is. Small 10th grader finishes an ancient Egyptian puzzle that unlocks a new personality in him, but it only comes out when he plays a card game based on old hieroglyphics meant for children. He plays card games with his friends, his rival is this badass billionaire with a sweet trench coat to cover up the fact he has a bowl cut, and he's able to win almost every battle through using the heart of the cards, the usual anime way of trying to win a fight through the power of friendship. As far as anime goes, the original season I'd say was pretty good. Stylish animation with really unique style for anime based partially off Egyptian mythology, a fun mystery unraveling the story behind Yugi's alter ego Yami, just a fun show to watch when you want to turn your brain off and see some monsters fighting. Don't be mistaken, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not a perfect show by any means. We all have fond memories of it, but looking back, it wasn't exactly the pinnacle of quality writing. To put it in the best possible sense, it's like when everyone watched the first Pokemon movie way back when they were kids. When you watched it after buying it from the rental store, it was like, wow, I hope Ash and Co can beat that evil Mewtwo, and then when Nurse Joy says Pokemon shouldn't fight, you're like, yeah, why should Pokemon fight each other to where they cry? And of course when Ash died and the Pokemon cried him back to life, some of us probably teared up. That's when you try and relive old memories when you're some 27-year-old geek living in your parents' basement, and you can't do anything but point out everything that's wrong. Wait, Pokemon shouldn't fight? That's like the entire purpose of the show. That's what happens every episode, you dumb fucking movie. Why is Mewtwo a villain when he does nothing so far but be abused by people who want to harness his power? And what the actual hell, Pokemon can cry and bring people back to life? Hey guys, do you mind helping out my friend Tumnus? He ain't looking so hot after the White Witch found him. Am I the only one who drew the connection that if Pokemon existed in the world of Narnia, the White Witch would have lost? But anyway, just like the Pokemon movie, several of the dumb gaps in story come from our good friends from the best defunct studio in America, 4Kids Entertainment, otherwise known as We Tainted Anime Forever, the company. To their credit, 4Kids was one of the biggest importers of anime from Japan and turning it into an easily understandable English dub. The reason they were so successful at the time was most likely due to the fact that not many other companies were like them, other than an old Funimation, who basically only did Dragon Ball at the time, so they had a virtual monopoly over the field. It didn't matter if their voice actors gave shitty performances or they made egregious edits, unless you knew how to get the original stuff, you were stuck with not many options. 4Kids, for the unaware, dubbed Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Sonic X, and One Piece, shows you thought were the best back when you were 10, but looking back are most likely either poor interpretations of a better story or just bad. To clarify, I'm talking about the 4Kids dubs, not the actual animes. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was one of their first shows, and its biggest edits have to do with when Yugi's parents die, and not to mention a little thing called the Shadow Realm, which was used to cover up when characters would die or were in serious peril. For example, there's an episode where Yugi fights a magician who's chained their legs to the ground and has these nightmare scythes who, when touched, will immediately send them to the Shadow Realm. And in the original anime, they were just kind of buzzsaws, and if they got to your legs, they would, well, chop them off and you could die from blood loss. It was really a bit less dramatic, but also a lot more serious. It really kind of took away from the darker aspect of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, but it was 4Kids. What else could they have done? The anime on its own has some dumb decisions that made no sense when it came to the real-life card game, but most people who've watched the first season of the anime know that since it was still establishing the actual rules. If anything, the show was known for its great monster designs and fun characters. The thing is, though, that wasn't the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Series. If you look at the original Japanese opening, you see there's a subtext for dual monsters at the beginning. Why is that important? Well, the original manga was simply titled Yu-Gi-Oh!, so why would you need to clarify? Because there was a completely different series before that, a series that stuck much closer to the origins of the manga rather than later on when it was solely based around card games. If you haven't read the manga like some filthy casual who has a life or something like that, you wouldn't know the true nature of Yu-Gi-Oh! As a series. Instead of Yugi playing fun card games with his friends all the time, he could usually be facing off in life or death scenarios. One of the first episodes of the series and chapters of the manga has to do with Yugi's friend being held at gunpoint by a criminal when they play a game to decide who will die. They each need to choose a finger to kill the other with. The criminal obviously picks his trigger finger, but Yugi picks his thumb, and before the criminal shoots him, Yugi uses uses his thumb to light the criminal's cigarette and then drops it on his palm while he's pouring Russian vodka that would set him on fire considering he got it all over himself. He basically bursts into flames when the lighter falls on him, and that should give you a good general mindset for the tone of this series. In this series, Yugi wasn't possessed by an objectively good pharaoh, but rather a morally ambiguous darker version of himself who would enact punishments on his either losing or cheating opponents. The games played could range much more as well. Instead of focusing solely on a single card game and the villains that come with it, Yugi would play several kinds of games that came out of his grandfather's game shop. Some of the games Yugi acquires are kinds I'd like to play myself because of the pure fun factor the games present and the relative ease it could take to create them. This was during a time long before Pegasus was the main villain of the series. He was one of multiple villains in a much longer saga of Yu-Gi-Oh! As a manga franchise. Almost all the villains in the manga were various high schoolers from Yugi's school. He fought with so many of the elite fighters and higher-ups of different social classes that crossed his path that I'm amazed he wasn't feared around the school as some kind of vengeful god, but, you know, he kinda was. Nonetheless, the main thing I was trying to get at was that the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga only lasted 7 volumes. After those volumes ended, the series completely based around cards began and ran much longer, but I think that in a way, conceptually and in themes, the original has more of an edge when it comes to creativity and character development. And with these first 7 volumes being a kind of black sheep in the endless abyss of different Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game spin-offs and anime, it would only be fitting that the anime accompanying that manga would be quite different from the show that came out after it. As far as the internet knows, Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0, as it's referred to by the fans, was never really given much of a spotlight, with only a single season, much unlike Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, which ran for a full 5 seasons and multiple movies, not to mention the entire legacy continued through spin-off that are still running today. Despite the Duel Monster series picking up exactly where the first one left off, the two have no connection as far as TV networks or animation studios. Hell, Bandai even produced their own version of the originally titled Magic & Wizards card game before Konami created their own, and now are considered valuable collector's items. The reason the show never got picked up for a second season was simply because it didn't do well in ratings and was swiftly cancelled. Another personal theory I have is that the show was just not marketable enough to a younger demographic. Despite the darker pieces of the story involving mental harm, explosions that actually kill people, and generally much more dangerous stunts being cut out, the show just didn't have the factor of possible franchises of merchandise being built around it. I mentioned I love the different games showcased in the manga and anime, but trying to go all out with just one of them could be a risky move. That may have been the reasons Duel Monsters cards had a good few episodes that weren't included in the manga to drive further encouragement to buy it, but what do I know? I'm just a high schooler who's played Yu-Gi-Oh! For most of his life. I feel it is definitely a shame it was cancelled, since the original series had much more potential for interesting fights with, if not an unpredictable outcome, at least plenty of creativity and stylish animation. Then again, this season was animated by Toei, and don't get me wrong, the season visually looks pretty nice. I love the more neon yet dark color palette, and the heavy shading fits much more with the dark tone and scenarios. I adore some of the lighting choices and monsters animated on screen for the Shadow games, but Toei is kind of a company known for not doing the best job handling their own properties. One Piece is a show that's been going on since 1998, around the exact same time as Yu-Gi-Oh! And for the first several seasons up to around the time skip, everything went fine despite some tedious filler that's expected with most long-running shonen anime. After the time skip, they still had plenty of the memorable, great moments from the original manga, but the series became so bloated with filler episodes and unneeded flashbacks that it felt like the series was just stalling so they didn't accidentally overlap the manga, which it totally was, and it could feel like a chore sometimes to slog through. Then there were the animation errors and reused sound effects during prolonged fight scenes. Oh god, the Dressrosa arc, an arc that many have mixed feelings about only for the many additions Toei made to it. Then there's Dragon Ball Super, and most of us saw these kinds of memes and images clowned on a few years back, so I don't feel like explaining it. Am I saying these shows are bad by any means? Hell no, I love them, but Toei didn't help them at all and seemed to try its best to lower the quality. It is true that the recent One Piece arc looks phenomenal, and Toei has really shown what they can do with it, but that doesn't take away from the fact that if the show kept coming from Toei for years and years, there would have been a period where the show became slightly harder to watch, I'm just saying. The real question fans had when they first heard there was an anime based on the original 7 volumes of the manga was pretty simple. Was it good? And subjectively more important, how does it stack up to the other anime and manga it's based on? Could the show pull through with its own themes and messages without relying on the card game several children ended up revering long into their adulthood? Until about 4 years ago, there were only a few episodes to go off, so it would be unfair to judge the entire thing off a few examples rather than the whole, and after looking over the series and coming to my own conclusion Do I think it's good? I mean, kinda. Considering the manga source material and all they had to work with, I was honestly expecting more from the series than what I was given, and was even let down in a couple areas. Would I say it was better than the sequel series? Better than the last 3 seasons? Yes, no question about that. But better than the first 2 seasons? I'd have to give a long think about it because of multiple factors that make it hard to decide. In terms of characters, it's mostly the same dynamic as the sequel show, with some variations, such as, just like in the original manga, Jonochi was more of a bully to Yugi rather than a friend in the beginning, and needed Yugi to show he actually cared before they finally grew closer. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, these characters are not going to be referred to as Joey, Tristan, and Taya. Those are not their original names, and I'll be mentioning them as they were in the show as Jonochi, Honda, and Anzu. Sorry dubbed over sub people, I still like to watch dubbed anime. Honda is different from the manga and sequel series in that instead of being Jonochi's friend and sometimes toady, he's a geeky hall monitor. How you would go from one character to such a different one is jarring to me, and I think it does harm the relationships between the characters, as it was shown the two acted as a team in every other version. I don't mind Honda acting as this different role, but it shakes up the dynamic in a way I don't really enjoy. Anzu and Yugi act the same, but for some unexplained reason, Toei decided to add a really minor character from the manga named Miho, make her one of the main characters, and completely change her personality. In the manga, she was a shy librarian. In this, she's a really girly, materialistic ball of annoyance. I don't like Miho. She's needlessly shoehorned into any episode she wasn't in previously, and tends to either act annoying or be in the scene for the purpose of messing everything up. It's all the more frustrating to me as a reader of the manga to know there were better written solutions to issues, but Miho had to be there because she's part of the main cast too now, and you better not fucking forget it. Kaiba could still be considered the main villain, but like in the manga, he doesn't show up nearly as often and was usually regulated to 1 appearance per 5 episodes until his big arc hit. On Kaiba, his motivations for wanting to get revenge on Yugi didn't really make as much sense in the anime, since he tied with Yugi in their duel monsters fight rather than losing and being subjected to the feeling of death, making him want to come up with a plan to take Yugi down a peg or even kill him. He just makes this 5-layer life or death simulator for shits and giggles, I suppose. His backstory of why he was so shallow and cold was also taken out. Basically, he and his brother were taken in by a billionaire who subjected Kaiba in numerous classes, basically taking away his childhood so he could become the ultimate businessman. As a teenager, Kaiba used these skills to take the company from his father, and realizing he'd lost the game they'd been playing for years, Kaiba's adopted father admits defeat, congratulates him, and jumps out a skyscraper to his death, Kaiba not showing a glimpse of sadness or remorse. It's a sad story that shows how Seto got to where he was, but it made much more sense in the greater narrative, and the fact Toei cut it out leaves room for plot holes. Like, why is Kaiba so wicked and vengeful and intelligent and all that? From the only glimpse we got of his childhood, he seemed pretty happy, so how did he get to where he is now? The only other main character to talk about was Bakura, who just like Yugi had a Millennium Ring, which would turn him into an evil version of himself that would collect pieces so that he could add to his game board. The catch being that the pieces were made from actual people, and their souls were trapped inside. He's given a fine representation in the anime as the last antagonist, nothing much else to say. The main story is there really wasn't much of one at all. It's just Yugi solves Millennium Puzzle and has friends. Friends get in danger. Yugi saves them, then he punishes someone. Or alternatively, Yugi has Millennium Puzzle. Other person wants Millennium Puzzle or has their own Millennium item and wants to fight Yugi. Yugi fights person, and then they become friends, or Yugi defeats them. A few episodes near the end relate to the branching story that would become Duelist Kingdom, but it's mostly episodic, which is better set for this kind of show. In almost every new installment, we see a completely different game from the one we saw previous, and it's all really entertaining. One thing I didn't find entertaining was the runtime of each episode. 22 minutes is standard for most anime, but in the case of Yu-Gi-Oh! Here, I think 11 or even 6 minutes would suit it better. The way the show works is the crew will take a chapter from the manga and stretch it into a full episode, since each chapter was a self-contained story. On paper that's fine, but it becomes harder when a chapter is only around 22 to 25 pages, meaning they need to have around 1 whole minute per page. This leads to there being a lot of filler dialogue and extra contrivances that didn't happen at all in the manga, such as instead of Anzu getting a secret job, Miho follows her, then Honda follows Miho, then Jonochi and Yugi figure out that all 3 of them have a job. Then, instead of having a criminal hold Anzu
Anzu at gunpoint, they search the place to find a criminal who's been on the loose, catch him, and then find out that the store owner was another, entirely separate but still dangerous criminal. This type of excess padding makes me feel like saying, just get to the point already. Since the manga was much faster, we got to see the conflict set up, enacted, and resolved quickly rather than waiting 5 minutes for Yugi to just find the guy.
Oh no, he ran away. We gotta chase after him, Scoob.
Sometimes when the writing team creates their own episodes, it works better in the overall narrative, but these episodes are also lower quality than the mangas because they're just less creative. Oh, Yugi played a game with a girl who has flowers, and she thinks she wins because there's only one flower left in the bouquet, but he takes the flower from her head. So clever. A game with numbers that I found interesting was when a guy got a 6, was so cocky that he had won against Yugi that he threw the dice at him, and it actually broke the dice so that Yugi got a 7.
Oh, but I forgot, that wasn't animated in the show. We needed to have the episode about Flower Girl, yeah.
The only real saving grace those episodes had was the animation, which I'll say again, is really nice and adds plenty to the show, but it just isn't enough to keep me entertained. I find it really underwhelming that the season 0 of the show was hyped up by so many people as being a better alternative to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Everyone knows, when I could really take it or leave it as far as the first or second season are concerned. Yes, the games are fun, and the nightmare sequences are the best animated parts of the show, but the journey it takes to get to that point is more often than not a slogfest. After looking through it, I believe another reason it didn't last long was because it couldn't find its audience. It isn't quite far enough for teens by bogging down the story, the games get too complicated for children, and readers of the manga won't like it for the changed script. If I could give a recommendation, check out the manga, and after that, look up specifically the game scenes from the show, and you'll get a much better experience more akin to the original intent. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time. And indeed, Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0 was a show. Sorry if my voice may have sounded a bit weird in this video. I've been having trouble with my throat, and it was a little bit difficult to get through this, but I did it. So, yeah, that's cool. Thanks again for watching, and now I'm gonna go and take some more ibuprofen so I can numb the pain.